if we're talking trade up for a safety, it's Kyle Hamilton. It's hard to imagine that a team who's never drafted a safety in the first round is going to trade up to do it, right?
We can only hope.
I really like the
Best player in the draft.
Love the player.
I really like the player. It's just hard for me to imagine them bucking that.
Jalen Reagor, Andre Dillard, are they on this team after the draft?
John McMullen and Jody McDonald here with you on Birds 365 as we close in on the NFL draft 10 days away. That means our next guest has been working hard for the last couple of weeks. He's got 10 more days in front of him to try and figure out what the Eagles are going to do. Dave Zangaro from NBC Sports Philadelphia. All right, we marked 10 days to the draft. Let me back it up 10 days. 20 days out from the draft, 10 days ago. Did you have a better or a lesser understanding or guesstimate of what the Eagles are going to do in this upcoming draft, Dave?
I mean, it's about the same. You know, it's the time of year where everything you hear, you kind of have to think about why you're hearing it. But, you know, it was nice. Even after they traded and they ended up with 2 picks in this range instead of 3, it didn't really change anything as far as the players we're talking about, right? It's still the same range. They're still the same needs. So in a way, it was kind of nice that they didn't completely move out of where they were. And a lot of the names we're talking about are the same names we've been talking about throughout this whole process. And there are just different ways to go about it. And I'm still of the belief it's hard for me to imagine how he's sitting at 15 and 18 and picking. It's just not the way he does the draft. So something tells me we're not going to be talking about 2 players at 15 and 18 in a week and a half.
Well, okay, Dave. So are we talking in that type of situation? Are we talking about a trade up like last year? Do you think it's more likely targeted trade up to get Devontae Smith, just a few spots, trade back? A lot of people have talked about maybe the top of this draft isn't as good as normal, but the middle of the draft is a little bit better than normal. So maybe that speaks to trading back. If you had to lean one way, which way would you lean?
Probably a trade up. So the way I look at it is there are players who are going to go in the top 10 that the Eagles probably wouldn't be in on, whether that's offensive linemen. You know, they're really not going to draft a tackle in the first round. It'd be highly unlikely. And then the quarterbacks, if they're truly out in the quarterbacks, there's probably 2 that are going to go, I think, in the top 10 when all's said and done. You're talking about Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. So if you have 2 quarterbacks and you have a few tackles go early, and you know, those top 3 picks, a lot of people think there's a chance you could see 3 edge rushers. But if you don't, and one of those guys starts to slip down, and then there's tackles that come off, the quarterbacks start to come off, it's not crazy to think that one of those edge players could be within their trade up range. And after last year, you kind of know what it would take. They moved up from 12 to 10 last year. They gave up a 3rd round pick. So if you're talking probably a similar trade to move up a few spots from 15 to get a player who might slip into that range, I think that's within the realm of possibility. I don't have the exact target for you, but I think it would be a defensive player. I don't know if they'd trade up for a receiver unless there's one that they really fall in love with. There are different types of receivers, but I don't think like the receivers in this class are good. I don't think they're as good as the top 3 last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. If they're moving up for we'll continue with your hypothetical, which I like. And I think you could be dead on right. If they're going to get aggressive and move just a couple spots to target a guy, don't know who he is, but can we target position? Would it be an edge guy? Would it be a tackle if the big kid from Georgia is still on the board at that point? Would they buck tradition and go with a safety, which they don't usually draft in the first round, as in never drafted in the first round in the history before? What position do you think it would be? I know it's tied to the player, and we don't know who the players are, so it's a difficult question. But what position do you think they'd be targeting to move up and get?
I'd mention edge first, just because there are a few of them, right? If you're talking about safety, we're talking about Kyle Hamilton. Really, for a trade up. I mean, I guess another safety could sneak into the first round, but if we're talking trade up for a safety, it's Kyle Hamilton. It's hard to imagine that a team who's never drafted a safety in the first round is going to trade up to do it, right?
We can only hope.
I really like the
best player in the draft.
Love the player.
I really like the player. It's just hard for me to imagine them bucking that trend like that hard to trade up and draft them. And a defensive tackle for a trade up, we're talking about Jordan Davis, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know if Devontae Wyatt is a trade up type of player, and the Jordan Davis thing is tricky because I don't know what he's so different. It's really tough to figure out how a team's going to view him because it's unfair to call him a run stuffing defensive tackle, but that's what he is. But he can be so much more than that. But you have to kind of trust your evaluation on him and say, all right, well, this is what he was in college. This is how Georgia and the Georgia thing. We know they have great players, but it's really tough to evaluate their individual players because they had such specific roles. When you're that good, it's like you don't
count.
Hit the ball. I was getting played off there.
Yeah, no, we didn't Oscar you.
See, Oscars.
We don't want to. Yeah,
go.
We don't want to. Exit stage left. No, continue. But Jordan Davis, yeah.
Well, the Georgia players had like such specific roles that it's like Trayvon Walker. The numbers aren't great. Well, yeah, because he's asked to set the edge all the time. He's not. So they had such specific roles that it makes it tough to really evaluate what they can be. You have to project, which is a little easier because they're really good players. But Jordan Davis is a tricky one.
Bigger picture standpoint, I want your thoughts on this, Dave. Is Howie Roseman, and he's right. He always talks about talent gathering season, and it's more than the first week of free agency, and you can keep adding players, and we've seen it. The Eagles were in on Stephon Gilmore, weren't able to get it done. Second place has been a theme this offseason, it seems. Who knows where Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, what happens there. They can still add talent. But when you talk to GMs around this league, and you talk to a bunch of them, they tend to say, in free agency, you want to make sure you put the caulk in, at least, to say when the big day comes, you don't feel that need to reach for something, whether it's a wide receiver, cornerback, whatever, edge rusher. From the start of free agency to now, I think the Eagles have more needs. You think that's fair or unfair?
I don't know about more, but they have needs. I mean, and they're glaring, really. The secondary to me is you look at it and you go, well, they have two spots they need to figure out. And like they have some young players on the roster, and I know Nick Sirianni talked up the young corners. They don't know what they have in the young corners. They can't. They haven't played, and they're all like day 3 picks, and at safety, could they get by with Marcus Epps? I guess could, like Marcus Epps and Anthony Harris are your start. Yeah, I guess, but that was a position they needed to improve, and that's not improving it. You're worse there. So, two needs. Maybe they do get Tyrann Mathieu. He's a fun player. And it seems like he's taking his time. And I'm guessing at this point, he'll wait until after the draft.
Yeah.
I wouldn't rush into that if I'm him. But you're right. I mean, they have needs they haven't filled. And you're right. It does kind of set up a scenario where you worry about them over drafting because, hey, we're sitting here in the first round. We need this position. All right, he's the next best guy. Let's just take him. It can get you into trouble. The one that always stands out to me is Marcus Smith. You overdraft sometimes when you're trying to fill a need, and they have to avoid that, even if it means not filling a need. And it's a tough thing to do. But the one thing, at least Howie has going for him, is he has a pretty safe job right now, whereas some GMs would probably feel the pressure a little bit more to overdraft and fill a need, where he's probably looking at it like, I'm pretty safe. I don't need to do that.
We've had a Marcus Smith and a Nnamdi Asomugha reference today, going back some old scary roads here on Birds 365. All right, the biggest move the Eagles made in free agency, of course, was Hassan Reddick. What is Hassan Reddick? Because John and I have gone back and forth on this a couple times. Is he an edge guy? If you put him down as an edge guy, you go, all right, well, the need for edge. You got Sweat, you got Hassan, you got guys, Brandon Graham coming back and Derek Barnett, whatever he gives you. You got enough guys there. Edge should not be a priority. But if he's a linebacker, who you're also going to bring off the edge, shockingly, could the Eagles actually bring 5 to get after the quarterback? It'd be nice to see every once in a while. How do you think Hassan Reddick is going to be used? I know it's just a label, but how would you label him?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's semantics. He's going to rush the quarterback. It would be wild if that's how they didn't use him. I mean, it would almost be malpractice, because in his career, we've seen what he can do and what he can't do. And yes, like at times, can you drop him? Yeah, like they can take advantage of that stuff at times. But I mean, Arizona really showed you what he can do and what he can't do, and they drafted him as a middle linebacker, and he wasn't good. And then they put him on the edge and he's good. And then he goes to Carolina and he's on the edge and he's good. So yeah, you play him on the edge, and they can call him a linebacker. He's going to be the Sam in this scheme, but he's going to rush the passer, and you don't pay a guy $15 million. This team doesn't pay a guy $15 million not to rush the passer. So I call him whatever you want, but that's going to be his role.
Well, you bring up a good point there, Dave, and that does indicate that you don't have to worry about it. He's going to rush the passer, because this team, as you stated, is very disciplined. And if they're going to allocate $15 million, they're not going to do that for just somebody playing Sam linebacker in a traditional fashion. That brings me to my larger point. Are they too disciplined these days? And I look at the wide receiver market, and for this reason, it's exploded. I think the Eagles were caught off guard a little bit, but I think everybody was caught off guard. I don't think anybody around the league saw this. But now that's the going rate to do business at that position. And April 18th, we're here. It's the first day people can start off-season work. All teams, not just with rookie head coaches. The Eagles aren't, but you can. Deebo Samuel's not reporting for voluntary work. AJ Brown's not reporting. Terry McLaurin's not reporting. It's kind of all the leverage they have to gain extensions. They want $20 million a year. The Eagles don't seem to me willing to go in to get these types of players. And is that too disciplined?
Are you talking about free agent signings, or possibly like acquiring
trades,
a guy
free agents, either for talented players? No matter how you have to get them, for talented players, the cost of doing business at that particular position is what it is. It seems like they're shying away. Is that too disciplined?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it in terms of that. What I will tell you is, a few years ago, the receiver market kind of surprised everyone the other way. The players weren't of the caliber and the age that these guys are. But a few years ago, if you remember, the Eagles. After that, it was like, like the Brashad Perrimans of the world. And they weren't great players, but they were like thought to be decent players that the Eagles should have been in on. And they were waiting on a price, and the prices never came. And then it was when the Eagles signed Javon Hargrave, because then they kind of pivoted and said, well, all right, we don't want to spend here. We'll spend in other ways. And then a couple of weeks later, all the receiver prices dropped. Those guys were signing cheap 1-year deals. So it's a tough thing to predict trends sometimes, and they go other ways. I have a real hard time faulting them for not signing Christian Kirk. He's the one that probably gets over talked about because it surprised everyone so much. But I have a real hard time faulting them for that. And I get your point that it's the cost of doing business at that position. But you have to ask yourself, is it wise to overspend on that guy? Or if you're going to overspend, at least let it be a premier talent, right? We see the Tyreek Hill deal in your league. At least that guy is a really special player. If you're going to overpay for the position, overpay for a special special type of player who can really change what you do. And I don't know if some of the guys who got those contracts qualify as that. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking around and you say, all right, Deebo Samuel might be available, he would fit that mold for me. He's the type of, he's obviously not Tyreek Hill. They're different types of players, but he's such a special guy that, at least for me, I would be willing to then throw money at that guy as opposed to throwing money at a Christian Kirk, who's a good player, but not, there are Christian Kirks out there.
Yeah.
And Dave, as we mentioned earlier, you have to put the Eagles' history of the draft into any thought process you have with this upcoming draft, because there have been some tenets that they followed since Howie Roseman took over, even before Howie Roseman was general manager, passed on from Andy Reid to Howie Roseman. One of which is the trenches, and they always dedicate resources to the trenches, and it served them pretty well. Even more so on the offensive line and the defensive line. Maybe that Stoutland guy has something to do with that. When is the dive onto the offensive line going to happen? We don't think it's happening in the first round. They did it in the second round last year. They paid dividends. Dickerson came in and played very well. Looks like he's going to be a staple there for a decade. If not the second round, third, fourth, fifth, I think right now on their roster, the position that they're deepest is offensive line. So that would suggest they don't have a need there, but they always have a need there because that's their philosophy. You can never have enough talent on the offensive line when the Eagles make the dive onto the O-line.
Yeah, and we'll see how long Andre Dillard's on the roster. They look real deep now, but if he's gone, and then you'd have Jack Driscoll as your swing tackle, who's played all right, but he's been hurt quite a bit early in his career. So yeah, they have depth, but that depth can disappear awful quick, and we know the way they feel about the Zitch. I'd still be surprised if they drafted one with one of their first 3 picks. I don't think 15, 18, or 51 would make a lot of sense unless they just feel like there's tremendous value. I could see one of those late, like maybe like the 101. if they draft an offensive lineman there, you'd be like, all right, I'm okay with that. But day 3, I think drafting an offensive lineman always makes sense if you're this team. And and I'm at the point now with Jeff Stoutland, he tells me he wants a guy, you get him the guy. Yeah. Within reason, Yeah. I'm not talking like if Jeff Stoutland says, hey, at 15, no. But, if Jeff Stoutland day 3 walks over to Howie and says, I want this guy I can turn into a Pro Bowler or this or that, I'm getting him that guy. He's earned that level of respect from me.
And don't forget LaRaven Clark. I'd like to bring up LaRaven. Quote the Raven. You got him as a potential swing tackle if they move on from Andre Dillard. So your odds, Dave, day 3 of the draft, it's May 1st, whenever, the day after. Jalen Reagor, Andre Dillard, are they on this team after the draft?
I still think it's likely that Reagor is on the team. Who's trading for him?
I know, that's what I say.
I have a real hard time. Maybe, someone can convince themselves that they liked him coming out of the draft and there's something there, but I don't know how you can. I kind of feel bad like piling on Jalen Reagor, but like it's not there. He's been a negative player in his time. He's made them worse. So I don't know how any team can watch him and think, I want that guy on my team. At least with Dillard, we've seen moments where you go, okay, he's functional. And offensive line play in this league, we're a little spoiled here watching what the Eagles have had. There's some bad offensive line play in this league. And Andre Dillard could be a starting tackle somewhere. So because of that, the Eagles have a lot of leverage and they're not going to give him away. But I think it's more likely that Dillard gets traded than Jalen Reagor.
All right, DZ. Will the Philadelphia Eagles Jalen Reagor? And here's what I mean by that. A couple of years ago in the second round, they took Jalen Reagor to be the backup to Carson Wentz.
Jalen Hurts.
What I say? Jalen Reagor.
They had Reagor on the head. I was wondering, second round.
Let me hold on. Restart. Will the Philadelphia Eagles Jalen Hurts? And here's what I mean by that. Just 2 years ago, they took him in the second round to be the backup to Carson Wentz. Did I get all the names right so far? Let me keep going. I understood that at the time. Not everybody did. Everybody screamed, "What the hell's Howie Roseman doing? He's the first." We're now jettisoning to to today. Second round pick this year. We know they're, or at least I should say, I'm saying they're not going to use a first round pick on him, on a quarterback. But if one of the quarterbacks that we consider the top 5 this year, John continues to believe that the Eagles like Sam Howell a lot. I don't personally like Sam Howell. Don't think he's a good quarterback. But if the Eagles do like him, and they're sitting there in the second round and he's there, will the Eagles think about taking a quarterback in the second round? Not the first, but the second round, and basically do to Jalen Hurts what they did to Carson Wentz a couple of years ago. Get an inexpensive safety net if things go bad. We'll give this guy a shot, potential quarterback in the second round.
I guess it's possible. I don't think the value would line up personally. I'm not a big fan of Sam Howell, if that's the guy we're talking about. I'm a bigger fan of Matt Corral.
Anyone else. I just mentioned Sam Howell.
Matt Corral.
Whatever quarterback
those would be the two.
At 51.
Which I don't think anybody's going to fall to 51. But if one was, it would probably be Sam or Matt Corral, I would think, would be the two potentials. Desmond Ridder, surprising to me, Dave. I think he's going in the first round.
I do too.
Yeah. So if somebody was going to fall, and I don't think either is, but if somebody's going to fall to 51, I think it would be one of those two.
Yeah, I still don't think they would. Not that they wouldn't think about it. I think they would think, their history tells you they would think about it. And look, if they did it, I do believe that it wouldn't bother Jalen as much as it bothered Carson.
Yeah.
But also, Jalen doesn't have the standing in the organization that Carson had at that point.
No. Yeah.
He doesn't have the contract. Carson had the contract, so he should have felt a little more secure with it, and he didn't. It's kind of funny. Carson was more secure with his position, but Jalen would probably feel more secure if they did it. I think they've talked so much about building a team around Jalen, and it was kind of my qualm when they did it to Carson. Was you're supposed to build around the player, and then you draft a guy who doesn't help him. For a lot of reasons, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think the value lines up. It doesn't help them at all right now if they're building around Jalen Hurts. So I think it's unlikely, but this team, their past is their past, and they've shown you why. But they would have to really like a guy, I think. And they really did like Jalen Hurts. It's funny now that we talk about him through a different lens, like they're not committed to him long term, but they liked him enough to draft him at 53.
Oh yeah, 53.
I think it's like we forget about that. That they liked him enough to draft him at 53, and I mean, to me, it was still ill-advised because they had to know the personality of the guy who was their franchise quarterback at the time, but they were willing to risk all that because they liked Jalen Hurts enough that year. So it's funny now that we see him through this different lens where, they're not really committed to him and they don't like him. They liked him not that long ago enough to draft him. So sometimes that stuff gets a little overblown.
All right, I'll wrap it up here with you. Before that, follow Dave on Twitter at Zangaro NBCS. You can read him at NBCsports.com. He's got the Eagle Eye podcast with his buddy Reuben Frank. Listen to that as well. Dave, you mentioned, and I'm with you with Jalen Hurts, 100%. Like, if they draft a quarterback, it's not going to affect him. He's just going to put his head down. He's going to keep working. And I think we all have that same sentiment. At what point, though, or is there a point that all the whispers start to get to Jalen? He is a human being. I mean, we talk about this trade with New Orleans, and now we're settled into 15 and 18, but that was a clear indication, kicking the can down the road because next year's quarterback class is better. He knows that. And he sees Stroud and Bryce Young and even the kid from Boston College who could be potential top 10 picks. Do we sort of dismiss it a little bit too much that ultimately some of these lack of getting behind Jalen Hurts, because you can say we're behind him, but your actions prove otherwise. Can that start to seep in at some point?
I guess so. It doesn't, to me, that doesn't matter as much as his reaction to it. Right? He hears it. He knows it. He's a smart kid. He understands the situation. What I think the difference with him is that he kind of channels it correctly. And I think that, and look, I'm talking about Jalen Hurts like I really know him. He's a guarded guy. You know, he's a guarded guy, and we know about his personality, what he wants us to know. That's just who he is. So, but based on what I do know about him is that I think that if it creeps in and he hears it, he then uses that as fuel. And ultimately, I don't know where it leads with him. I don't know if I don't think it'll bother him to the point where it becomes a major negative. Now, look, if we're doing this in another couple years still, at a certain point, he's going to be like, all right, guys, like, what do you want from me? But at that point, they're going to have to figure out a contract anyway. So it's like, it can only go on for so long. And it feels like, a lot of people thought we'd have a definitive answer on him after this past season, and we don't. Are we going to have a definitive answer on him after this season? Who knows? If we don't, though, at that point, we're getting to a spot where they got to figure it out.
Right. Yeah, he can ask for an extension after next year.
He can. And at that point, it's like if he's not a sure thing franchise guy, I think the Eagles know that they can't get stuck in purgatory. I think it's a dangerous place to be with an NFL team where you have an okay quarterback and you're trying, well, this is the best we can do, and let's just try to win with them, because you need to be so good in other areas, because a great quarterback can cover up blemishes on your roster. But if you have an okay quarterback, which by all accounts, like, he's going to be an okay quarterback. He's a starting level quarterback in the league. Maybe not a high level starting quarterback, but I see enough that I think he can play in the league. But if he can't reach that next level, then you're talking about, all right, well, we got to build around him. We still got to pay him, even if you're not a
$30 million. That's where we
get paid quite a bit. So that's the danger zone if you're the Eagles, and it's a zone where I think they're smart enough to realize they don't want to get stuck there.
Yeah, John and I have said the same thing here, so we're all on the same page. If he's in, he's in. If he's out, he's out. If he's in between, he's out. They're not going to play the in-between game going forward. All right, last thing, DZ, it's a Zangaro question. Any draft specials coming up on NBC Sports TV side this week? And if so, are they going to stand you next to Barrett Brooks, and do you get scared that he's going to hip check you off the stage if you say something he doesn't like?
Well, it's fun. Normally when I'm on with Barrett, they put me like strategically in front of him. So like the camera angle. We used to play a game back on Quick Slants called Big Problem, Little Problem. And it was Gunner throwing questions at me and Barrett for obvious reasons. We have On the Clock coming up on Friday at 6. Those have been a lot of fun. We've been doing one every week leading up to the draft. And we'll have a bunch of draft coverage next Thursday. As the first round kicks off. So yeah, thanks for asking. It'll be fun. I enjoy doing those shows with those guys. It's fun, it's the most fun is we get to the newsroom early, and Mike Mulhern's our producer, and we'll all crowd around his computer. We're watching, cut ups, and we're actually watching Kyle Hamilton play last week where he covered the whole field. Those are the most fun moments where we were just kind of chopping it up and watching some film together.
And 12-3 right here, Dave. We're having the reunion. Barrett Brooks, D. Gunn, and Rob Ellis.
All my guys back together. I love it.
Yeah.
DZ, thank you much for coming on with us today. We'll talk to you again soon. We'll be checking you out Friday night on NBC Sports Philly. Yeah, go ahead. Kick Barrett in the shins. You have our permission to just go ahead and kick him. Not too high. We need Barrett, but he can take a little pain. Go ahead and kick him in the shins if he gives you a hard time. Thanks for coming on with us today.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Dave
Thanks, Dave.
Zangaro here with us on Birds 365. All right, Jody Mac coming back. We need to put a bow on the show.